This is a global climate change video. Its title I've given it is "The World is Being Rapidly Warmed," and that's definite, and it should be pretty damn obvious to everybody right now. And this video shows national greenhouse gas emissions trends over the past 40 years and what they're doing today. Global climate change and emissions trends put out by the Associated Press. And this first image says it all. I'm making this in 2012. The title is "A Warming World. Heat waves, wildfires and floods afflict the Northern Hemisphere this summer." The pattern fits climate scientists' predictions. They say carbon dioxide and other heat-trapping gases are boosting temperatures through the greenhouse effect. Well, the scientists, a little bit of the media slant still showing through here, which is not good at all. This is a definitely established fact now. It's not just that scientists are saying this, it's unequivocal. Also, the latest publications have demonstrated by statistics and computer crunching the figures that, in fact, the wildfires, heat waves, and floods that are afflicting the Northern Hemisphere are due to global climate change. Here's one slide to show what the various national emissions presentations that we're going to look at adds up to. This is the latest global carbon budget by the Global Carbon Project, and this is emissions, and it's from fossil fuel and cement carbon dioxide emissions. And so here is 2010, and here's 2011, and heading up very sharply and very severely. This is a globally suicidal trend of carbon dioxide emissions. This will lead to global climate catastrophe if something isn't done about it on an emergency and drastic basis, because these carbon emissions, because of the science, has to build up, and hence build up at an accelerating rate, which is what's happening to the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations right now. I want to now take a look at the growth rates of carbon dioxide emissions. From 1990 to 2000, emissions were increasing at a rate of 1% per year. Then they took a huge jump from 2000 to 2010 of 3.1% per year. The rate of emissions tripled when they were supposed to be, the rate of emissions tripled when they were supposed to be going down. The growth rate from 2010 is a record of 5.9% per year. You see this dip here when for the first time emissions went down. This was due to the economic recession engineered by the big global banks. They blackmailed engineered by the big global banks, and they grabbed all the money and another massive amount of credit deal with the leading governments, trillions of dollars. And following that, then the governments threw money into the economy, and that's the fossil fuel economy to boost the economy back up again. And so we had a increase of emissions of an unprecedented 6%. These carbon dioxide emissions, these are billions of tons a year. So in 1990, they were at 6 billion tons per year, and now at 2010, they're over 9 billion tons per year. So here's the map. So here's the map showing the emissions trends, and it's emission trends by population. So that's per capita emissions of carbon dioxide in tons. So there's a couple of important things to consider at the outset. One is that global warming, climate change, and ocean acidification cannot stop increasing. unless the world converts to a zero carbon economy. So all the time the world and the nations are emitting carbon dioxide, global warming and climate change and ocean acidification are going to get worse. It's just a question of how fast they get worse. And nobody's doing that. Nobody has any plans to do that. So right off the bat, we're on a globally suicidal course. The other thing that everybody knows is that the original industrial nations, European nations and the United States, are exporting more and more of their emissions to the Asian manufacturing market, particularly China. Here's a map from the World Trade Organization showing details of Chinese exports to other nations. This is year 2009. And about half of Chinese exports, manufactured exports, go to the European Union and the United States. The leader, in actual fact, is the European Union. Other importers, big importers relatively from China are Canada, Mexico, and Japan. This is some recent research from Carnegie Institution for Science in the United States, and it shows the carbon dioxide emissions, as it says, embodied in trade. So China is the largest source of carbon dioxide emissions now. It's ahead of the United States, but as seen from this map, which shows the net flow of carbon emissions embodied in trade among the main exports and importing countries, it shows that the developed nations are exporting a lot of their emissions to China. And what this study found was that this amounts to 30%. So of the Chinese emissions, which are the highest in the world, 30% of those emissions are the responsibility of other nations, and those nations, as this shows, are largely, of course, the European Union and the United States. So these great big black arrows here are the amount of emissions that in actual fact the economies of the European Union and the economies of the United States are producing, but the emissions are happening in China. So now that we've got the significance of greenhouse gas emissions with respect to international trade under economic globalization, because it was economic globalization that gave rise to all this, and economic globalization was driven by the United States and the EU nations. So now we got that in place. We'll go back to our map of national emissions and take a look at this in some more detail. We see the change in emissions per capita from 1970 to 2007. When we look at the bars along on here, they show increases from 1990 to 2007, so just the past 20 years or so. And these graphs show the past 40 years or so. If we look at all of these nations, what we find is that everybody pretty well is emitting, or whether their emissions are decreasing or increasing, they're all concentrating around 10 tons of carbon per capita. So there's the United Kingdom, there's Ireland, there's Spain, which is getting up to 10, there's Portugal around 10, there's France just below 10, and there's Australia, which is above 10. There's a country which is that's Ukraine, which is gone down and now leveling out at around 10, and a lot of these countries are leveling out at around 10. China, of course, due to its global industrial base and its global emissions, has increased very greatly, because the rest of the world with the money is purchasing from the Chinese manufacturing base. 132% increase from 1990. So these here on the face of it are increasing their emissions, and these down here on the face of it are reducing emissions, but particularly the reductions are not quite as they seem. Turkey increased 56%, Spain 46% increase, New Zealand 34% increase. And maybe that's because, New Zealand shouldn't really be doing that. That's maybe because of livestock and agriculture, because that's a large carbon emitter. Portugal's increased 32%, even Greece has increased 28%, Australia's increased 24%, Slovenia 20%, Norway has increased 18%, Ireland has increased 16%, Austria, even a country like Austria, European, very advanced, very well educated country, increased greenhouse gas emissions by over 14%. Japan 12%, Finland 12%, Canada 11%, Croatia 10%, Netherlands 6% increase. The same thing applies to the Netherlands, European, advanced, very well educated nation, supposedly very environmentally aware, but emissions have increased 6%. Italy increased 5%, Iceland 2%. So now here are the reductions. And right off the bat, we look at Lithuania, and we're starting with these apparently big reductions recently by the Eastern European nations, but they're not actually reductions, because over the past decade, they're all increasing trend. So what we see here on Lithuania there, and Ukraine there, and Latvia there, is the collapse of the USSR and that economy. And then you'll see around the late 90s that they got involved in the world economy, and so their emissions are rising quite sharply. So these are all increasing emissions, in fact. They shouldn't be on decreasing. That's misleading. Ukraine is increasing, Latvia is increasing, Belarus is increasing, Estonia is increasing, Romania has increased and it's flattening. Slovakia, that's pretty flat. Russia is pretty flat. Bulgaria, that same pattern is increasing now, and you'll see all these are converging to around 10 tons per capita. Czech Republic flattening around 10. Germany, supposedly very environmentally conscious and supposedly very environmentally capable, but whereas greenhouse gas emissions dropped slowly to the mid-90s, they've now flattened out. They're not dropping anymore. Luxembourg is very, very high emitter, and recently that's increased. Here's the one exception, which is Sweden. In actual fact, Sweden is the only nation in which what we see here, at least, is a consistent reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from 1970. That's completely exceptional. There's no other nation that can compare with Sweden. Some of Sweden's emissions will be exported to Asian manufacturing market, but right now that's very little. Sweden is not a big importer from China like the EU and like the United States. So Sweden's way ahead of the global pack in terms of what it's actually doing with its emissions. Here's Hungary. This is Hungary is relatively better than most of them. Still can't compare with Sweden, and it's flattening out. It's not on the reducing trend, which Sweden is still on. Poland flattened out around 10. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is supposed to be very environmentally aware, and particularly aware on climate change. However, there's really not been hardly any difference since 1970. To be fair, yes, there's a little bit of a reduction going on, and that's dropped. UK's dropped 11% since 1990. That's certainly way better than most, but it's still not a great established reducing trend. Belgium is also dropping, but it's still at 10. The EU as a whole has dropped 8%, But as you can see, really that's not making any significant contribution um, to bringing down global emissions, and certainly not making any contribution to avoiding global climate catastrophe, because the emissions from all of these nations, as long as they continue to emit the carbon dioxide, because it lasts so long in the atmosphere, builds up and up and up and up in the atmosphere. So we have to see a reducing trend. And the only nation that shows that, as I say, is Sweden. No other nation shows an established, significantly reducing trend. Certainly not the EU. Switzerland is flat, just below 10. Denmark flat around 10 and now increasing. Although again, the overall is since 1990 is recorded as a decrease, but over the past few years it's increasing. France is consistently below 10. That's largely because of its energy reliance on nuclear power, and it is managing to reduce emissions even more over the past few years, but still, that's not making any significant difference. United States, there you see the United States being another exception. This is a bad exception because the United States is well above 10. See, that's way above 10 and way higher than the emissions per capita of the rest of the world. There's no nation that can compete with the United States as regards a bad situation as regards emissions. So United States, in sort of every aspect, is the leader in destroying the planet and leading us to global greenhouse gas catastrophe. Although, as I say, we're headed that way until nations adopt a policy of converting to zero carbon emissions economy, and no nation is doing that. Why is Sweden such a leader in reducing emissions? Well, Sweden has always been environmentally aware, certainly, and but a lot of the other nations that are supposed to be environmentally aware are doing nothing as regards emissions. Um, I don't know a lot about Sweden. I'll certainly have to learn, and we all should. But I have noticed that Sweden's energy is dependent on a lot of hydroelectricity and nuclear power. So we've got to conclude looking again at the combined picture that all this adds up to, and it all adds up to an accelerating rate of emissions of global carbon dioxide, and that for certain then is a course for global climate catastrophe. It's a global suicide pact, as it has been called, and that's what the global economy is. It's a global suicide pact.